Chris Courtney here from New Pragmatic. Thanks so much for taking a moment out of your busy day to spend with me. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of HTML structure. So often when I'm working with new students, I see real talent in their ability to do basic information architecture, but it's the translation from something like Sketch or Figma into HTML that really they struggle with. It's really easy to see how to change fonts and how to add colors, but what really trips people up is when it comes time to organize the file in such a way to make it responsive and flexible for the different experiences that we have to design for people, regardless of what type of device they're on. I'm of course talking specifically about the application of CSS Grid to our HTML that we create. In the example here, we're looking at a couple of taco dishes. This is very easy for a veteran designer to figure out how to create a two-column design. When a new designer gets started trying to translate their work from something like Figma or Sketch into HTML, they get into some real issues. With this design in mind, let's move over to CodePen and take a look at some of the common mistakes that people make when translating their work into HTML. So here in CodePen, we have the basic structure of what we had in Figma, recreated with some basic tagging. And this is typically what I see when I'm working with a designer that's new to front end. They will go through and they'll make the semantic tagging that they're expecting to make, but they don't necessarily understand how to structure the file in such a way that it's going to work better in CSS when we begin applying styles to it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and uncomment out the second element. And what will typically happen in these instances is I'll see somebody come through and they'll put a class on this, and it'll be a class like second, and then they'll come in and they'll say second, and there'll be margin top and 20 pixels or something along those lines. And what's happening is they're beginning to make individual adjustments to anchor tags, head tags, things like that. So that this is easier to see, I've went ahead and created some styles that are going to color code our block level elements and that anchor tag, which is an inline element. What you'll find is frustration begins for most new designers when they apply CSS Grid. Right now, everything is operating as you might expect, except that anchor tag has now become a block level element, meaning it's now going the full width. Where the trouble really begins is when we begin applying columns to this. As you can see, this is not what most people are expecting. Our two-column design has completely broken apart, and most new designers don't necessarily understand why. In fact, it's nearly impossible to begin to pull this apart without understanding that the trouble isn't CSS Grid. The trouble is very poorly written HTML. By simply adding a couple of divs to this design, suddenly we have something that looks a lot more like what you would expect to see. Although, there's a couple of problems here. The first problem is because a lot of new designers go in and they try to force alignment into areas. We added that margin top and the class of second. Well, that's what's causing this break right here and making things out of alignment. It's very difficult to see that as a new designer because you're trying so hard to make things work and you're losing sight of the fact that you're making your designs very brittle and they're going to break the moment that you move into a responsive environment. So you have to remember to remove all of those elements that are now getting in the way. And then you have to remember that if I'm using CSS Grid, I have other elements available to me, like grid gap. that are going to help space things out appropriately. This is a very common problem that new designers will run into. What I want to emphasize here is that even though it looked broken, CSS Grid was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It really came back to the fact that you needed to have stronger, more appropriately written HTML so that CSS Grid could look at elements appropriately. When you apply CSS Grid to a section, it's only going to then apply itself to the children of that section. That means it's applying itself to these two divs and it's ignoring the elements inside of that div. Pay close attention that the add to order anchor tag is now an inline element again. It's not going all the way across. When CSS Grid was applying itself to that anchor tag, it was going all the way across. And of course, CSS Grid becomes very flexible. It's very easy to change the design around once you have the structure for your HTML set appropriately. So what I hope this short video shows you is that it's not CSS Grid that's giving you the trouble. Write better HTML and you'll get more consistent results out of your CSS Grid usage every single time. I'm Chris Courtney with New Pragmatic, and we'll talk again soon.